Hey, and welcome to another episode of the Blue Screen Brothers. Yet another episode in Building 18, live in Rødland, outside of Seattle, with my good friend and MEP, Rob Quickenden. And something happened with Frank. He kind of left with a cliffhanger. So he kind of took off and dragged in what was supposed to be a Pluton expert, but we ended up with Chauncey.
That makes me sound really bad.
He also went for coffee, and we didn't get that either. So
No. That was the last we saw of Frank.
Yeah. So you're stuck with me, and luckily I do know a little bit about the Pluton, and actually I've been kind of following Pluton for a while, so I'm happy to talk about it.
And for those of you who don't know you or heard anything about the previous episodes, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah. So I'm actually on Frank's team. I run our technical narrative storytelling, so you kind of think about like if we wanted to talk to our IT pros or talk to our like small medium businesses and talk about security and AI and management and all these things that I think really make Surface shine within the business space. That's my job. So I get to go talk across Microsoft to kind of figure out what does it mean for Surface to shine in all that, and security being one of them, and Pluton as part of that kind of security story. And so, yeah, I think I'm somewhat qualified to talk about Pluton.
All right. And yourself, Rob?
And I'm Rob. I'm an MVP as well, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Sicilians. We're a Microsoft and Cisco technology solution integrator partner, and kind of my role is similar, I guess, front facing with our customers is to have the same conversation, right? So talking to them about their security strategy, their AI strategy, and of course that fits very nicely into the kind of Surface conversation and Pluton, right? And whenever I say Pluton, they think I'm saying Pluto. So I think it's a very topical conversation you picked, Alex, because I think there is definitely some education to be done in the market, and hopefully at the end of this podcast, there'll be a lot more knowledge out there about Pluton.
I've spoken to so many security engineers, software engineers, and they haven't heard of Pluton. It was announced like 3 years ago during Ignite, 4 years ago during Ignite, November late 2001 or 2. Time flies. And we've seen two great articles on one on Tech Community from Microsoft and one from Microsoft learn.microsoft.com on Pluton, with great illustration and images on what Pluton is. But what does Pluton really do? And if I'm not mistaken, you think that Pluton suffers from the same problem that MPVs does, Chauncey?
Ooh, all right. You're just gonna throw it out there. I love it. Okay, yeah. So let's start with what does Pluton do? Gosh, was it only 4 years ago? I feel like it's actually been longer. I thought we didn't release it on the SQ3 chip. Anyway, so what is Pluton? Microsoft Pluton is actually a open source project. So one thing that I think is actually unique about the approach that Microsoft's taking and Surface is leading in this case is that we sought out to create a new way of securing cryptographic things, right? Whether that's identity or, kind of how the TPM functions or whatever really security secrets that you need to be able to secure. We wanted a new way to be able to remove some of the potential attack surfaces that are out there. Now, I'm gonna say that, and I need to do some prefacing. So today, the TPM actually provides most of that functionality, and it does it really well. So I kind of want to state that. TPM as a capability has been around for a while. We actually require TPM 2.0 on Windows 11 for a reason, because we can do amazing magical things with it, right? We can use that for virtualized base security. We can use that for couching BitLocker keys, for backing up your Windows Hello keys, and there's so many things that the TPM is actually quite critical to the actual security story for Windows. In this world where you've got crazy hackers doing the hackiest of evil hacky things, some of them have figured out that in the right environment, so in a very specific environment, you can capture data as it's traveling from the TPM to the actual CPU.
Because that's the typical problem, because there are computers where, first of all, you have desktop computers where you have space and you can install a TPM if you lack that on the motherboard. You can purchase and kind of plug in a new TPM, and there is physical space and there is physical connectivity. So there's nothing wrong with you putting in a reader in between the TPM processor and the chip. And you can also do that by just sniffing the bus. If you know what you're doing, you can sniff the bus. Or like Weird Al Yankovic said, another one rides the bus. So there is a problem. So if I'm not quite profoundly mistaken, you just simply remove the bus.
Yeah. Well, and let's kind of start, because I do want to make sure that we're being clear about this. You're correct. Absolutely, you can sniff the bus, and you can kind of write that data and capture that data as it travels between TPM, and that's very specific timing. It's very specific capability. So you actually have to understand and have the knowledge to do that. You have to have the device. And once you have the device, you're actually already at a point where you need to, like, once the device is in the hands of an attacker, there's already tons of other ways that they can attack that device, right? And the last thing that I'll say is, because of all of these things, it's probably on the totem pole of the ways that someone's going to attack something. It's pretty low, right? Because they're probably going to go over phishing or some kind of email scam or some kind of other way of, like, looking over your shoulder long before they do any kind of TPM sniffing.
But it falls back into, I think, to that targeting attack, doesn't it? This is not general attack and organization level. This is specific, targeted, stolen device, that level.
And so we're like, okay, we see this potential targeted attack that is a risk that's out there. How do we protect against that? And while we're doing that, how do we maybe come up with a way that makes it easier for us to take care of the kind of processor itself? Because the other thing that I will say about TPM is there's, like, I think, 2 or 3 different TPM manufacturers that are out there, and they each have to have their own package. So in the case of, like, Spectre Meltdown and kind of some of these other attacks that came out there, any kind of things that maybe impacted the TPM, you actually had to create a specific package to be able to update those and keep those deliver this, and you actually had to push that package out there through whatever means that you have for updating your devices. It's not exactly the most management-friendly way of doing things. And for Surface, one of our, like, mantras when it comes to our device is we want to make it as seamless and easy as possible to be able to actually manage something. And so when we heard that Windows was coming up with this new platform called the Microsoft Pluton platform, we were all about it. And the idea is that we can take the system on chip, and I think Frank talked about this in a previous podcast, but just as a quick recap, system on chip's concept is that rather than having separate kind of discrete components all over a board, we're going to use all of the tiny little transistors, the billions of transistors that are shoved into a chip, and we're going to actually dice those up into various things like the NPU, or sometimes you can actually even use it for RAM and GPU capabilities.
And 5G.
And 5G, sort of. But yeah, I mean, like, basically any other kind of functionality you can think about it. Well, logically, that means that we can also create a security processor. I like to coin it as the SPU, and I'm really trying to hope that we can get it to go there, because I think that's a little easier to understand than the Microsoft Pluton. But, in the meantime, this Pluton processor takes up some of those transistors to focus specifically on security. And because it's directly on the system on a chip, we're actually removing, to your point, we're taking that bus out, right? We don't have the ability to travel because it's literally just a part of the system. And it's still hardware isolated. So some people go, well, does that mean that it's basically a firmware TPM? It's not quite, right? It's still actually an isolated part of the chip.
And it does process. It does the processing as well.
Yeah, and it actually does do the creation of cryptographics and a whole bunch of other things as well. And it's been around for a few years now. So we released it I thought the SQ3, but at a minimum, I know we released it on the Surface Pro 9 with 5G. Because it originally required an ARM processor, because they were the ones that were kind of going into the SOC architecture. And so when that device came out to the consumer public, the Surface Pro 9 5G basically served as the TPM at that point. And really when it came out, that was its whole purpose, was to kind of replace the TPM. And I think some of the key things that I would say around that is, first of all, yeah, we can take that entire cryptographic workload that the TPM provides today. So again, BitLocker, Windows Hello, the actual creation of cryptographic keys, the storage of cryptographic keys, you name it, right? All that stuff was now happening in Pluton. But the degree of why that was important is because we now have the ability to update all of that through Windows Update. So again, if I talk about like that removal of complexity and making it easier for managers, like IT pros and IT managers to actually manage these devices, rather than having to come up with a separate package to fix a vulnerability or to provide a new capability, we can now push an entire package upload over Windows Update. So all you got to do is just make sure it's connected to Windows Update. And now that actual component in your device, that security component, that processing unit, can get fully updated over the web. And so we brought kind of a removal of complexity. We brought this capability to store all those things in TPM and in Pluton, serving as a TPM. And it's been doing that for a few years, right? We've now since evolved the platform. So we're in 2025 now. I got to check that every once in a while. We just announced in January, about the same time that we announced our latest Intel Copilot Plus PCs, that Pluton will now serve a new functionality.
And if I'm not mistaken, that's a requirement to be defined as a Copilot Plus PC. So you need to have as a minimum baseline. So Windows 11 requires 8th generation of Intel processor equivalent or newer. It requires a certain set of memory, and it also requires a TPM. Now, in order to be a Copilot Plus PC, it is 16 gigs of RAM, 256 gigs of storage, an MPU with 40 TOPS or more, but also the beauty of what?
A Pluton processor.
A Pluton processor.
I will say there's some nuance to that. So it requires a Pluton processor, but it doesn't require the Pluton processor to serve as a TPM. So that's important. That's an important distinction, because if you look at the Snapdragon consumer Copilot Plus PCs that have come out from Surface and some of our other other OEMs that are out there, the consumer Snapdragon is using Pluton as a TPM. And that provides that whole thing that I was just telling you about in terms of like the isolation and everything like that. One thing that we found out as Surface, though, is today Pluton isn't FIPS certified. So specifically in the financial services industry and a few others industry, and actually even globally, they kind of look at FIPS certification, even though it's mostly a U.S. thing. You want it to be FIPS certified to be able to support XYZ regulations and whatnot. And so in order to maximize compatibility in the enterprise environment, we chose to provide both a discrete TPM and Pluton functionality in the Intel devices and our commercial Snapdragon devices. Now, are we going to continue to go with that in the future? Who knows? As we continue to see Pluton be more prevalent in the market, maybe we should get some certifications and stuff right, exactly. But right now, consumer side of Copilot Plus PC on Snapdragon specifically, Pluton is serving as TPM. And in the commercial side, Pluton is serving a new functionality.
And I think that's a really important point as well, in that it's very easy with, think chicken egg scenario, of, what comes first, right? Does the technology come first? Does the adoption come first? And I think actually what's really important in the way that Microsoft have done this is either or now comes. So we have the ability of, as you say, when FIPS certification happens, then actually we can almost flip the switch, right?
Yep.
And we can switch over to that. And I think the beauty of that then being managed through the whole Windows Update process as well. And again, going back to, why would enterprises and commercial organizations care about this stuff, is they haven't then got to think about another tool to deploy, another thing to manage, another thing to go on change control, because this just happens through the same process they're already using to manage those devices. And that's really, really important for organizations.
And I would like to compare that, because I want to pick your brain on that, Rob, because you listen to commercial customers worrying about this, but newer devices have Wi-Fi 6, then newer devices have Wi-Fi 6E, then newer devices now have Wi-Fi 7. How many corporate customers, commercial customers have access point providing 6E and 7? That's not very many, but the day you have access points providing 6E or 7, you will see that the devices get a huge boost in performance, capacity, speed, and battery life as well, because Wi-Fi 7 uses less power than Wi-Fi 6. But why should we invest in devices that have Wi-Fi 7 when we don't have Wi-Fi 7 in our offices? So why should corporations and businesses invest in devices that have Pluton when it's not being used?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great question. I think it goes back to my point I said about chicken and egg, right? It's you need to rely on organizations to be like Microsoft to be looking forward as to kind of what's coming, looking at those security vulnerabilities and fixing them before people even realize that it's something to be fixed, right? And I think that's been all the way through the history of Surface, right? You know, when we think about the new form factors that came about, we touched on an earlier podcast about, you know, the invention of Windows Hello, which everyone takes for granted. So I think we're in this position now of creating devices and security to fix problems that many organizations don't currently know exist or know how to fix or even thought they could fix. So, you know, we're again in that kind of point of creating innovation for the future, which the rest of the OEMs will pick up and follow.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting because, you know, I think we've talked about this notion of Pluton being a platform for the future. We've done it for probably about a year now, and I'll tell you, like, I've been wanting to tell everyone what that future was for a while. We were just kind of waiting on the clear signal, and now we can. So as of January, we announced KSP, which stands for Key Storage Provider. And honestly, there's not
rolls off the tongue, that doesn't it?
Rolls off the tongue, yeah. There's actually not a ton of public details about it yet, but what I can tell you is that its whole purpose really is to kind of serve as it's there. So that it doesn't roll off the tongue, but it's pretty darn clear on what it does.
Yeah.
It stores keys, right? And in this case, the first kind of wave of keys that it's going to be focused on is identity keys, and more specifically, Entra ID. So for our customers that have, invested in Entra ID and Pluton, they'll be able to take their Microsoft Entra ID keys, and those are going to get stored and created within the KSP provider, the key storage provider within Pluton. And really,
so similar in a way to Azure Key Vault.
Yeah,
Similar
actually,
kind of
it's a great way to think about it. It's basically Azure Key Vault local.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's a good way to think about it. And what's nice about that is it kind of takes that kind of same concept that the Azure Key Vault does, makes it local, but it also takes advantage of everything that we've just been talking about with Pluton this entire time, right? Which is you get its own usage of the SOC, so you kind of remove the TPM sniffing risk. You get this idea of ongoing updates and being able to receive new capability or maybe a vulnerability fix over the air. And so I think there's this kind of future where you see these capabilities start to come down to Pluton over a simple update. And in fact, that to me is one of the beauties of Pluton is I mentioned KSP. I mentioned that it's not out yet, but it will be coming to just an update with the Surface Laptop and the Surface Pro running both the Intel and the Qualcomm versions sometime later.
And knowing that Pluton and these processor microchips have been out there for a couple of years and that we now start to see some functionalities, I'm really wondering what are the future unknown features. What will we see in the future when it comes to both identity feature? One of the things that I listened from when I was a consultant, but also internally in the bank that I work in, is that why do I have to set up my Windows Hello on every device I touch? So I would just imagine, hopefully, maybe we could see that we could roam that around. I don't know. I would love to see something like that.
Well, now you're about to start another conversation. So I've actually been working with the Windows Hello team for a long time. I was originally a seller within the healthcare industry, and we were trying to find exactly what you were talking about with this idea of a roaming identity. Today, not to say that they can't change their mind, but today the Entra ID team, and at the time it was Azure Active Directory team, pretty adamant that they do not want your biometrics in a floating place. And that instead, FIDO is actually their answer.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah,
because because FIDO basically keeps that security local to the device. So if you kind of think about Windows Hello, and we are definitely digressing a little bit, but if you think about Windows Hello today, there's basically two different sides of the identity that gets stored. You get asymmetrical key pair, right?
Private public key.
Yep, exactly. Yep. And part of that, the private key is on your device, local, secured by the device itself. Historically TPM, now we're talking about KSP, right? And then the public key is kind of what you use to unlock your Entra ID, like access to everything. And in order to unlock the private part, you would use Windows Hello to basically access that. So you're using your biometrics actually to just unlock a private key local that's secured by the device. The moment I put my biometrics in the cloud, I think the hesitation, even though it's not like we take a picture of your face we actually literally just store a hash of your face. It's just a whole bunch of numbers, very cryptographically like driven. Like it's basically impossible to take that and turn it back into a face, right? There's still this, I think, peace of mind that we want to be able to provide our customers, that information isn't something that's out there.
And some of that's knowledge, right? Because I think there is that concept of, you might walk into my kid's school to visit, parents' evening or whatever, and they take a photo, right? And I think the perception of it's a camera, it's taking a photo. And I think that's not that users are stupid or anything, it's just that there's an understanding issue. And I think we have that same scare factor with voice print, right? You think about all the voice hacks at the moment, and the concerns over banking and those kind of things. So I think there is definitely a fear factor about where you store that data and what you can do with it.
And you'll see now, actually, the direction that we went is instead of just FIDO, because FIDO was also kind of limited in its capability too, is passkeys. Passkeys is really kind of the option, right? Because now, instead of using my face, if I have a multiple roaming situation, I can just use a passkey, whether that's a physical passkey or a digital passkey, because I can, again, secure that private key against a hardware. And that's the important part, is that we have an asymmetrical key pair no matter where we go. I like the idea, but I don't ever see us roaming biometrics. Now, I say that here in 5 years, maybe the
give it a week. Give it a week.
Maybe, I don't know.
Give it a week.
You think of Windows Hello Mobile?
But
I've seen more crazy stuff than that.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
And I will say that, I think Pluton opens the door for things that we're not thinking about, right? So that's what I love about the Pluton processor as well. Is I would have never guessed that the KSP was going to be a thing. I mean, it kind of makes sense. It's the logical way to go. But, I'm curious to see what we do with this kind of security processor forward. And I think it's a cool part of our future. And again, the cool thing about it, we just update it with an update. And so you'll get some of these features coming down with just a simple Windows update through normal channels that are already secure out there, and you don't have to take care of the management system.
I think, again, it goes back to the Surface innovation, which is easy to forget sometimes when you think it's a laptop, right? And you can buy these from anybody. And I think, we're obviously here at MVP Summit, we're talking AI quite a lot, and we think, Copilot plus PCs, right? And we were talking earlier about, what comes first, the hardware or the software? And I think it's a very similar kind of concept of, at the moment, we've got loads of these devices out there with MPUs and almost no software that actually can take advantage of them, right? And we've got a lot of this stuff coming, and we see a lot of these things coming from ISVs and other vendors. And I think it's a very similar story, right, with Pluton, is that we've got the technology that now enables so many more things to happen. And I think that's always been the Surface mantra.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, love it.
Well, on that, we have a lot of more information to come. I assume that there's going to be a Pluton podcast with Chauncey and Rob in the future. We just need to see more features being announced first.
Love it.
Love it. Thank you so much, guys. This has been really interesting. And for you listening in, please go to learn.microsoft.com and check out what's new and latest on Microsoft Pluton. There are really some nice infographics out there as well to see how the Pluton stack works. So until next time, thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Chauncey.
Yeah.